started.
Okay, so welcome everyone for this Forge API update. My name is Saul Fauvel. I work for Autodesk for a long time now, and I have a strong focus on Forge for the last few years. I have two colleagues with me, Viru from India, which will be monitoring questions, as well as Denis, which will help me at the end of this presentation to talk about the recap engine. So the agenda for that presentation is the first part will be on few updates about the data management API. So few things which have been added lately to the API on which bring some cool stuff to be used into your application. Then we'll review as well OSS API bucket list change that we already announced on our blog. A couple of things on model derivative. A lot of time spent on Webhooks, which is a pretty cool API. And to finish, as I say, the recap API. I won't cover every single API since the beginning, but really just focus on the updates which came into the API, which I think makes sense for you to use into your application. So the first one is on BIM 360 Docs folder. There is a change which will allow you now to rename a resource as well as delete the resource. So for doing that, you need to have the right scope for sure on the access token. But the endpoint is the patch, project, folders endpoint. What is very important to understand is for the delete functionality, which is not a delete verb, but a patch verb. It's a soft delete, not a hard delete. So a soft delete means that a file is marked hidden, so they disappear from the tree, but they're not physically deleted from the storage. They will be later, but right now the patch project item delete functionality is a soft delete. So you have to remember that. So that's only available to BIM 360 Docs because we're in a three-legged mode. And to use that API, like every other BIM 360 Docs API, you need to provision your account with the client ID of your application before you can use this API. So here is an example of renaming a folder. What is important is highlighted in red. So you give the URL resource that you want to patch. And then in the attributes property, you fill a new name with that attributes name equal whatever you want. And that will patch your resource with that new name. At the same time, if you want to delete a resource, you would use the hidden attribute and you would set to true. Because it's a soft delete, if you remember that URL, you could undelete as long as the resource has not been physically deleted from the storage. So it's a single Boolean attribute, and you patch that into your payload when you call this endpoint. So again, highlighted here in red everything which is important, which is the URL of the resource you want to patch, on the attribute you need to pass into your payload to activate that. So the example is in curl, but as you know, every single programming language which could do REST API call could do the same thing. So now you can also copy from a folder to another. So it's useful when you want to do a cross-project copy of files or copy files from one folder to another. In that case, you still need to use the post-project folders items endpoint, like you would upload a file. So when you upload a file, this is the exact same endpoint. But there is a new query parameter where you can specify from where you want to copy. And I highlighted again below on the curl example that you want to copy something into a specific folder with a name, etc. But you have a new query parameter copy from marked in red, where you would specify which resource version you want to copy from. And that would be enough to tell the system that instead of uploading a physical file from your computer, for example, you would simply copy an existing resource from a BIM 360 docs project to another, or from a folder to another. So as long as you have provisioned your accounts onto two systems, then you can copy files across just by specifying files. So it could be used for duplicating files or doing backups, whichever way you want to do it. Another thing, so last modified time rollup, so on the folder entity, is a new attribute. So this is when you do a request on an existing resource. You would see now a new attributes showing into the payload, which would be the last time the hierarchy was last modified into the system. The date as is specified in the ISO 8601 format. Really here, it's when you ask for a resource, you will know if anything changed, or you know the date of the last time something has changed. So do you need to go further if you cache the information on your system? That property will tell you if you have to go deeper or not. So it's really useful when you want to cache information on your end rather than going through the tree entirely each time. That is one interesting thing. But we'll see that there are other techniques which could be interesting with Webhooks, for example. So the other techniques before Webhooks is when you do a query, you could check if a resource was modified since the date. So you could filter things directly when you do a project folder get. In that case, if you specify an header with if modified since, and you give a date, time, the system will reply to you everything which has changed, and will return you a 3 or 4 HTTP code in return if nothing was modified, and in that case, the message body will be empty. Again, it's for optimizing getting information from projects on hubs. Instead of parsing every single node, you would just go through on maybe if you've cached the last time last week, you're just interested to know what has changed since last week, rather than getting everything each time. So that's really about performance in receiving information from the system. So you will need to do caching on your end. So that was the, let's say, major updates for the data management on BIM 360 Docs API since we last talked at AU. OSS. So there was an announcement made on our blog about the bucket content list change. So there are two important things to remember on that change. In theory, it should not break your code, but it depends how you wrote your code. So there is a possible impact. The first one, the return list will be not anymore in lexical order or alphabetical order. So resources could come unsorted. So if you were expecting that the resources returned to you were sorted in the list, it's not the case when this change will come to production, because it's not yet in production. That will come. So we're telling you in advance. The other thing is there is a next parameter, an optional next parameter at the end of the payload in the response. And this next parameter usually tells you what should be the URL to query the next range of resource, because you can say you want to receive a payload with 10 resources, but if you have 20 in your bucket, then you need to go 2 times through that query to get everyone. The next parameter is there to tell you how to get the next range. And there is a start at parameter. Today, the start at parameter contains the object key of the file you need to start from for the next query. So that start at parameter is now an index. So not anymore a file key. In theory, when you parse the URL, you got that as a string, and you use it for the next query, so you will not worry, but just in case you were assuming it was something different, just be aware that has changed. So as I said, there is a longer explanation about this on our blog, so just go to that place to read more about this. On OSS, there is to get. You can also get the list of buckets attached to your key. This endpoint is not affected by that change, even though it has the same paradigm, which is it has a startup parameter on everything. So this one is not affected. It's only when you get the list of items into a bucket that you may have to go in your code and check that you save. Model derivative API. So there was a change introduced around the EU about setting files references when you want to translate or extract information from a file. One thing which is documented, but maybe not at the right place, is how you use references in that case. So I want to go through a couple of examples with you so you understand how things are done. It's the same functionality as the one which is provided by the zip approach. So when the model derivative API was introduced first, you were uploading a zip file, and when requesting to translate the file or extract information from the file, you were telling to the translate method that you wanted to translate a zip file, so it was compressed, and you wanted to start from a specific file into the zip file, which is called the root file. The reference method is now, instead of uploading a zip file, which could be cumbersome when you want to have different versions of single elements, the set reference allows you to upload each file individually and describe to the system how they are interlinked each other. So you would still have the master file, the root file, the one from which you're going to start, and you would describe every single reference that you need to instruct the system. So whenever the model derivative API load your file, it knows which file it has to load on from where. So let's take a look at this. And we'll start with a little example I wrote, and I'll provide the source code if you're interested. I have the simple two-legged example, which is a batch script, which you want simply to translate a single file. You have the zip script. This time you're going to upload a zip file on start with a master file. And you have the reference two-legged, which is this time upload each individual file alone, and then set the references before getting translated. So let's take a look to the code now. And we'll start, they're all the same code approximately. So I always have like a parameter, which is a file I want to translate or to work with. I have a couple of functions here, which is how to get an access token, how to create or verify that I have a bucket, how to upload a file, how to do the translate, monitor the progress, and get the manifest. And the workflow is always the same: getting access token, create or get a bucket, upload, translate, progress, result. What is interesting is when you go to the translate, and this is where is the difference usually, when you translate a single file, that's the only thing you really need to provide to the system, which is the URL of the file you want to translate. And that URL just describes a single resource. You also tell to which format you want to translate. So usually, if you want to use a viewer, you're going to translate to SVF, and you may be interested to use 2D and 3D. So nothing different from what you used to. If I go to the zip approach, which is this time, I'm providing two parameters. So the zip file and the master file, because I need to tell as well from which file I need to start. And that master file is contained into the zip file. The zip file itself could have directories, folders. It's not really important. What is really important is you know from which file you're going to start. And another issue with the zip file is if you have two master files, you need to have two different zip files. So that's why I say it's kind of cumbersome sometimes to work with zip file. You can see that the workflow is exactly the same: access token, bucket, upload, translate, progress, result. But the difference stands into the translate method. Still exporting to SVF, still interested by 2D and 3D, but this time I give the URL of my zip file. I say that the resource is a compressed URL, which means that I have a zip file simply, and I provide the master file. And this is what I'm going to show you in a quick demo right after going through the code. So let's try this. So we'll run this code. So zip two-legged. I'm going to use an OBJ file, which is composed of 3 files. So you have the OBJ, which contains the geometry. You have the material definition file, and you have the texture. So if I go into my file directory, I have a zip file, and it has OBJ, MTL, and JPEG into it. Nothing different. Now, if I run this code, so I get the token, I verify the bucket, I upload. Now I'm requesting translation. So translation can take a while depending on the file format, but I took something very small, so it doesn't take a lot of time. I get my resource, and now I get the result. So that's the manifest of my resource. And what is interesting, because remember it was a zip file, so if I decode this URL, it will say zip somewhere. But my root file name, AUOBG, is there. I have the output in SVF, and now I have extracted everything. So let's see how it looks now. So I have another command line tool that I'm using very frequently. And oops, let me generate the access token for this one. And now I'm going to generate an HTML file for this resource. So I have on my command line script the HTML command. I say that the resource is the AUZip, which corresponds to the URL, and I want to do an AU HTML file, so I can view it. So now on my disk, I now have an AU HTML file, which is right there, and I can decide to view it locally. So AU, I can see now my cube has my texture applied on it. So which means that the zip reference has been applied during the model derivative translation. So far, so good. So that is the zip approach. But now let's say I modify my geometry or I modify the texture. If I want to translate this file, I have to recreate a zip, re-upload the zip, while maybe I only have one texture to change. So with my sample, because it's small, it's not really a problem, but imagine you have, I don't know, a 500 megabyte file multiplied by 10, that makes a big zip file. That is a lot of more work. So let's see now how we do with references. So references, the workflow has been broken a bit. So I still have the access token, I still have the bucket, but this time you see that I'm uploading each file individually. So I have the AU file, AUOBG file, AUMTL file, on the texture AUJPEG file. And once I have these three resources uploaded, then I can set the reference between all these files, and then I can translate this file using the references. And that's an important thing. You can translate each file individually if you want to, but you can also translate one file using the reference you set. Next, you monitor progress, you get the result. So let's see how things are done. And I go straight to the translate because you're fresh to remember what was done in the zip approach. So this time I still provide the URL of the resource I want to translate. But I need to say with a Boolean that I want to use the references which has been set before calling that method. And again, I extract to SVF to D3D. The set reference is the function right above, and this is how it's working. You would tell again the URL of the resource you want to start from, that's your master file, and you provide the file name. And then you start building an array of direct references where you provide the URL of the file, the relative path to the file, and the file name. So here, remember, I have the AUOBG which has a reference to a material file, which is the MTL file. And the MTL file has a reference to a texture, which is a JPEG. So you provide the relative path because it's defined like that, but you could have subfolders, etc., which do not necessarily need to be replicated on the OSS bucket. You could have the AU in the root of the bucket, but you could have something like Cyril / Simon / whatever. So you can describe where resources are defined into the references. On a sub-reference, you would provide the URN on the relative path, but you would not need anymore to provide the file name. That's a change between a first-level reference as a second-level reference. So the file name is required at the first level, but not sub-level. That's why I don't have a file name attribute on the sub-level reference object array for my texture. And then I send this request to the system, and it's recorded. And if I use the check reference true, I'm going to use information which is right there. So let's give it a try very quickly. So this time I'm going to use that script. So I'm uploading AUBG, AUMTL, AUJPEG. I set the reference. The system tells me success. I'm starting translation, saying that I want to use the reference which has been set right before. I get result, and again, if I decode that, I'll see it's an OBJ file. My file name is OBJ. I translate to SVF, and I get the geometry on everything I need. If I go here now, and this time I'm going to translate in HTML, my HTML command, I take the AUBG this time, and I say I want to see the AU2 HTML. I do this. I restart my local web server. I come back here, I refresh. I have a new file, AU2 HTML. Same result. So I know for this very simple example, I use OBJ, which are small files, and the description is very easy. But that's really the principle you should implement on your end if you want to use references.
We have a question on referencing.
Yes.
So can I dereference? In other words, as Revit, can I load and unload links?
So if you don't want to use a reference for translation, the only thing you need to do is to not have this parameter set. So if I come back here, let's say I've used set reference for one file, and I don't want to use it anymore. Just don't do this, or put false. And in that case, the system won't use a reference. So I hope I have answered the question. If not, can you clarify it a bit?
I will relay if it comes back.
Yeah. Now, if you talk about the Revit reference rather than the Forge reference system, so the answer is no. You can't modify the Revit, let's say, system itself. However, if you have a Revit file, which contain a reference, and this reference is active, you have both files on the OSS. And you don't want the reference to work for some reason. In that case, you can create a reference here. Let's say, let me modify it. Let's say this is Cyril RVT. And I only have one level of reference just to simplify things. Okay, and let's say I have my Simon, I don't know what it could be. Let's say it's another RVT. It doesn't really matter. And let's say it's in house folder. And here I put Simon RVT. Okay, so let's say in my Cyril RVT, I have a reference in the Revit file, which reference house Simon RVT. If I go to the system with this, and I say check reference true, everything will be extracted properly. Now, if I don't want the Simon RVT to be part of the translation, I have a couple of options. I say set to true, to false, so I'm not using the references. Or I could say something pretty weird, which is unknown file. Unknown file. And in that case, the system won't be able to find that file. So you would get an error like if you are in Revit. So if Revit can load the file on your desktop without that reference, that will be exactly the same in model derivative. So you would kind of unreference a file while it was referenced in Revit. Okay.
So the Mustafa's clarified. So this is about after translation. Can they dynamically load or unload the references?
Oh, no, no. So in the model derivative API on the viewer, everything is one package. So you don't have anymore the notion of file in the extracted result. You would get a scene with everything like in a database extracted. You know from the properties that it's coming from one reference or another, but it's not like you can manage file or references inside the bubble. The bubble is the database result. So if you want to have different views of references, you need to process otherwise. That's an interesting topic. We can probably take it offline. So Vero, if you can take the contact detail, we'll follow up with that.
I will pass on all the questions coming up, definitely.
Yeah. Is there any other question I can answer now, or?
There are few questions. So is line 114 not needed as line 113 specifies the file name?
Yeah, I do prefer to put it. That's part of the documentation. So usually I would put it, but yeah, this is correct. This one is optional. Anything else?
And one more question, probably a bigger one. Is it possible to add your own properties to a model when uploading it to Forge? This would make it possible not to store anything about the file locally before uploading the file. Letting Forge store these properties, and then you could retrieve the properties again when downloading the model.
Okay, so the answer today is no, or not easily. The two ways for you to add properties to a model would be to, so I'll take again the Revit example, to create properties inside Revit, and they would be extracted. So share parameters, or I can't remember the other way to create properties. So if you in Revit create them, then they would be extracted. So they would be part of it. The other way is you have your own database. Wherever you store it, could be on OSS, could be on an external system. Then you can merge properties using the unique ID of object and then have this representation of ID. So that's the state of the API today, but you heard probably for the Forge roadmaps that we are going to have a system where you would be able to edit and create properties on the fly. So that won't be part of the model derivative process that we're showing here, but that will be, once you have the bubble extracted, you would be able to make change on metadata using an API. So that would be the right way to do it. So the answer is yes, you would be able to edit metadata or properties in your bubble after extraction.
Maybe the last question for now. We'll take it other questions later. Is there any intention to add files from pre-signed URLs as references?
Can you repeat that?
Is there any intention to add files from pre-signed URLs as references?
I don't think we have any plan for this today, but I'll double check and I'll come back if you can capture the name. But I think the answer is no, but I'll double check.
I think that's it for now.
Okay, good. So let's continue. Yes. So API rate limiting. So all API today on Forge have a rate limit, like every other API. See, if you go to REST API from Google, from Apple, from Amazon, they all have a rate limiting ratio, and Forge is not an exception. So there is API rate limit. Some of the API, but it's quite large, so usually you would not need to worry. But there are a few APIs where it is important to know that there is rate limiting. So if I take the model derivative post job here, and I scroll a bit into the documentation, oh, sorry, I passed it. You would find that this API in particular has a 429 HTTP code, too many requests, rate limit exceeded. What does it mean, and why should you care? It means that for each developer key or client ID, there is a rate limit of 500 calls per minute for the job API. So if within a minute you exceed this 500 limit, the system will reply to you 429 and wait for the next call. It's not really an error. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just that you passed the limit that you authorize to use that API. So you will need to delay the call to maybe a few seconds in order to be able to process the 501 post job call to the system. So I just want to highlight that to you because you need to handle this error code properly. It's not that the system failed. It's not that you denied to do anything. It's just that you have to wait because you exceeded the limit. So today there is only 2 API with rate limit, so I'm just showing one to you, the post job. I forgot what is the other one. I think it is the get items on OSS, but I'm not really sure of that. But it's documented, so if you see a 429 and we tell you what is the limit, then just be aware that you need to handle that properly in your code. It's not an error, it's not a problem. It's just that you did too many calls within a minute for that specific API. So it's per API, per developer key or client ID within a floating minute. So within a minute from the time you call this one, you should not exceed a certain number. So I wanted to highlight that to you because it's more likely that in future, I don't know when, some rate limiting will be introduced on some other API. So just be aware of that and implement your code accordingly. I'm not sure any of our samples handle that properly, so we would need to update our samples to work with this thing to show you how to do it. My hope is that if you're using our SDK, the SDK will take care of that automatically, but that's not the case today. Another change coming is the metadata API. So now you will not only get the 3D information, we will also list you the 2D resources. So that's why in red you can see that the role now is being added to the payload, and that if you have sheets for Revit, for example, then they will also be listed. So from the metadata REST API, you can do exactly the same filtering as you do into the viewer when you request which resources could be seen. Here you could request which resources you could extract information from. So just another change. Webhooks. Okay, so you remember that there was two things we talked about early in this presentation about whether it was an header or a parameter you could pass to query information not modified since, which is like you pulling information from the system and you say, I'm only interested by getting change since that date. Webhooks is a more clever way to do it because if you use the two other approach, it means that you either caching information on your end or you just interested to know anything which has happened within a time frame. Webhooks is like a notification system made for the web. It's not fully real-time, but let's call it real-time callback. It is a notification system which will call you. So Forge will give you a call to tell you that something happened. So let's see how it's working. So yeah, so this slide just to tell you that it's not Forge specific. That's a technology which is used by everyone. So you can see that you could get webhooks for GitHub. So that's a cool example. So if you put your project on GitHub, you could use webhooks to tell the Travis continuous integration to grab your latest change and do automatic testing. But at the same time, you can tell Aerocrew to upgrade your server instance with your latest code change. You could do anything you want, actually. It's just like when you do something, the notification is sent to other system which could react to this. So today it's limited to data management, but that will be extended to more. So for example, the events you could subscribe to about change on versions of file on folders. So versions, because that's when you do a change on a file, so updating a new version or deleting or modifying a version. On folder, when something happens for folder, or if you copy from a folder. So it's defined as an HTTP endpoint, which means that you tell the system where to call you, because that's real time. It's something which is calling back your system. You attach it to a resource, for example, a file version or a folder. You can attach your own metadata on attributes. So when you call me, please send me this information with it. And you can associate a resource with multiple events. So you may be interested to get notified when a version is added or deleted, but not when it's modified or moved. So you can just subscribe to these two notifications instead of everything. On your end, so Forge, once you have subscribed to a webhook, Forge will start calling you. So on your end, you need to implement this endpoint. So it's not returning an error to Forge. And you have a fixed time to respond to the callback. So the best practice when you reply to that callback is to return immediately a 202 HTTP code, which means that you accepted the callback, and then you do your work, because Force doesn't need to know what you're doing and how long it takes. It just needs to know, have you received the notification? So you just say yes, and then you do your work. If you don't reply within 3 times every 15 minutes, there will be a final call in 24 hours. And if you still fail to respond, then the webhook will be disabled, because we don't want to continue calling you when there's no response. Yeah, like yourself giving up after a while. If nobody answers on the phone, you would stop calling that number. So same thing here. And we'll take a look at that example. So there was a EU presentation on webhooks made by Adam. So I have on the slides a reference to that presentation. So you can find it if you go to the Autodesk University AU online class on demand, and you just pass the class number, you would find the whole presentation. So if you want to hear more about webhooks, that's where you should be going. And we have 2 examples. We have one example where the source code is fully published, and there is a live demo that you can try out. So let's take a look to that. So the live demo, where did I put it? So I don't need this anymore. I don't need it. Oh yeah, I needed this. Yeah, here it is. So if you go to the to this website, you log with your Autodesk single sign-on account. You go into your hubs project, and then you can say, well, you know, whenever a file or a version is added to this folder, please send me an email. And you say create notification. And what will happen is whenever a file will be added, Forge will call the webhook of this application. In this application, there is a little code to send email notification. I would receive an email in my inbox. It's just an example of what you could do. For sure, you can do something more intelligent, such as, Okay, so the file will be extracted. I want to query all the metadata to calculate volumes, prices, and do like a bill of material if I want to. So this example is just like sending you SMS, email, or a Slack notification. How the code is written is probably more interesting. So there is a variable here, hook callback endpoint. So that is the callback endpoint, which I need to implement for Forge, and that's the one I'm going to register. So it's API Forge hook callback. That's good enough. That could be anything you want. And when you create a webhook, in this application, you're calling this API Forge hook handler. And in this one, you get the SMS, email, Slack parameter that you fill into the previous form. And then Augusto, who wrote the code, has implemented a wrapper for Webhooks where he would delete all the hook he had created before and recreate each hook that you want to subscribe to. So that is way to manage the different hook, but you can process differently if you want to. So here it's like getting the list of the different hooks it already has on the system for you. And this is where, and I think that's where it's important, this is where we implement the hook callback endpoint. So that's, let's say, the function Forge is going to call via the web to notify you. And if you look at what Augusto is doing is getting the payload, is checking if he's okay to process that, and then he would either return or process what he has to do. And here is just sending you an SMS, an email, whatever. Again, or maybe he should be sending, he should return right there for the status, but that's something else. I'll tell him. So the best practice would be right there to have this 202 right there. Not return because you want to continue the process, but yeah, so we need to modify that sample. So the class he has written, so it simplifies your coding, is it has a class here where he has a getHooks function and use the API to do that and return you the result. How to delete hooks, how to create a hook, which I think is the most important thing to understand. So the callback function, callback endpoint, sorry, that you want to call from Forge. You tell which folder you want to be attached to, and the attributes you want to attach to your code. And then you create the event like any other API. So it's a method post, you have the header for authorization JSON, and you pass into the body your request, which is right there. And from now, anytime there is a notification to be sent from our system, Forge is going to call your system to notify you about something, and then you can react. So my expectation is, for example, today, you remember this, let me stop this. Here, when I was requesting translation, I had a progress bar, and I had to pull from the system the information to know if the translation was fully completed and a success. When the webhook will be implemented for the model derivative API, you would not need to wait anymore. I mean, to pull the information, you would just need to wait that Forge calls you and tell you, oh, your translation URN, whatever, has been completed successfully or failed for that reason. So that's just another way to avoid traffic between two websites. So that's how you would implement a webhook in a very simple way. Is there any question about webhooks? Are we good?
I think you answered it, but I'll repeat anyway. Can the webhooks be used to start downloading when model translation is complete? I think you just answered it, but you can.
Yeah, so yeah, the webhook can notify you that the translation has been completed. So on your code, you could just say, okay, it's completed, so let's do it. Yeah, so yeah, I answered the question. Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to know more about webhooks, so we're still in beta. So let me show you that. If you go here, you see that webhooks are still in beta. We cover only, let's say, data management. It's called to be extended. As I said, I do expect to have this translation webhooks implemented sooner or later. So you will need to go to this one. You can get the documentation right there. You need to be whitelisted in order to use that technology. So you need to send your client ID to the email address which is listed there. The Forge developer team can help you, but there is also a dedicated webhooks email support, which is the same for being whitelisted. So you can send it there and people will work with you if there is any problem. Recap. So that's another API which has been launched around AU. Recap API has been there for a long time, but it was never settled into production, so now it is. And the idea is photogrammetry to create 3D objects. So you would take picture of an object, you would compute this picture to recreate a mesh with texture and more information, but as 3D information. So the workflow is really focusing on drones today, but you can use for different things. So your photo would be geotagged, and the information that you can extract from the process would be about the 3D mesh textures, camera position, on many other information. So you can recreate ortho views, 3D surface, on point clouds from your photo. You can get the output in different formats. So you have the RCM format, which is the Autodesk Recap Texture Mesh format, very high res. You have the industry standard RCP, RCS, and so you can use that. You can export to OBJ or GOT for the orthophoto if you want to. Not all formats are always available depending on how you work with API, but that's pretty well documented what you can do with this. Just to give you an idea. You don't always need to upload the photo yourself onto the Forge platform. Like for design automation, you can specify where are the photos. Maybe they're already on your server. So instead of you uploading the photos, you just tell Recap where to find the photos. So it can work in pull or push mode, as you wish, which is pretty neat actually when you want to save time. So Recap will grab the photo if you just tell from where to get it. On Denis, which I'm going to introduce now, I was very quick at the beginning of the presentation, has written two application examples. So one is just a client application. I don't think he's going to go into detail for this one, but that's if you want to do operations from the command line, as well as a website where you can upload your photo and process a scene So Denis work from our Montreal office. He usually supports 3ds Max on Forge. And I'm going to give him the presentation role so he can share his screen and he can do the demo on the example. Yeah. Okay, so you should be presenter now. Yeah.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so Cyril already introduced the Reality Capture API. It's a very simple one. It doesn't have a lot of things here. So the obvious approach is to write as a simple application as possible, following the following, having the following workflow. Create a scene, upload image, request the data. So this is where actually the first command line application is very handy, when you can point only to the folder with images. It will scan the images, upload them, and in the end, it will give you a result.zip. This example is very simple and show you only how it will give you only the OBJ. So for instance, for this very, very simple example, I have a couple of images. I already run this, as you can see, the output, and gave me a very simple zip result. Just to illustrate what it's kind of looking in general is quite nice. I mean that there are only 50 images, and out of this 50, it managed to do a quite interesting work of creating kind of a tree that I needed in order to model something around a sort of circular bench or something. Very handy, but still, this example is very, very simple. I mean, the recap CLI, it is written in Go, so you can go into releases and just download the executable, run in your collection, in your folder with image collections, and you will get the result. However, another sample that you can look at is Forge Photo to 3D, and it's more involving. So in this very example, you are presented with a more natural workflow. So you have to specify the scene name, ask what formats you expect. And this is very important because based on what formats you are expecting, the result will be presented only in these formats. Also, you are presented with two options to be an aerial scene or an object scene. Again, this is very important for algorithm. Otherwise, you will get not so clear results. So in this case, I'm interested in two samples, an OBGY format. It will create you the scene. So if we look at the backend, it will give you the scene ID, and based on this, you will do the further queries. The scene name in this case is necessary in case you want to retrieve through support the ID in case you lost or something. So as Cyril mentioned already, there are two ways to upload images, either from local drive, where actually you can take a couple of images and put it here, kind of download, upload them directly. Or if you already have these images stored somewhere on the remote server, so in this case it's an Amazon S3, you just can specify them, add the URI and everything, and it will upload them. This will take some time, especially for the local ones, but after everything is done, you are presented with the option just to start the scene. Well, it will be completed here with the set of data, and you are starting the scene. Now here is the part. Now I'm periodically polling the data. However, the API by itself allows you to, when creating the photo scene, to specify the callback. So again, it will be either an URI or an email that will notify. As you can see, this is a part of recap. It's not integrated yet in Webhooks. However, the very same thing that Cyril mentioned about the webhooks is kind of applicable here. So once the scene is ready, you will be notified. And in the end, you will be presented with options of that you selected previously. So I selected 3 options. I have 3 options of downloading the results. Just to illustrate you one example, here I have wall clock that I uploaded. I think it's about 100 or something images. I was interested in if there are any restriction of uploading images, but I couldn't find one so far. So Cyril mentioned that it's mostly for drones and kind of the aerial things, but it's doing quite nice job even for kind of 3D objects. I mean, not necessarily landscapes. And to illustrate that, this clock is very, very complicated one. And I was interested to see how actually it will handle kind of this thing. And I hope you see that it's handling it very, very nice. You have a lot of details. And it's interesting that I'm missing some details here and here above, as you can see. No problem. Having the scene ID, I can take another pictures, upload them again using the same scene ID, and request again the results. These 2 samples, I think Cyril already mentioned in the slides. So kind of, this is what I had to say.
Thank you, Denis.
Questions?
At present, nothing on recap.
Okay, good. So let's continue. We're almost done. Forge Viewer, I decided not to go into details about updates on the Forge Viewer because I have my colleague Jaime Rosales, which I have asked to post every single viewer since the last 9 months. So if you go on our blog, so forgeautodesk.com blog, and then you select Sir Jaime, then you can see every single post from Jaime about the viewer release notes. So the last update was in December, version 3.3 of the viewer, and if you go there, you get all the information about the update of the viewer. There was not a lot. It's more about rendering, and you can control styling for the rendering, so that's interesting, but it's nothing breaking what you do for an application. So the only thing which is probably interesting in the last update is that now if you you can access the in 3D files through the layer define on as well. You have these little you can turn on off in every single panel. So the model you can turn on off objects. So that's really what is interesting. In this code, then you'll be happy to see that Dutch language is now supported. Just our blog, go into the Jaime post, all the changes since the last 9 months about the Forge release notes. That's what I wanted to say about the Forge viewer. Now we have plenty of examples. I would quickly through in a minute. The viewer, you go here. If you have any support question, you can go on Stack Overflow. This is where we do our support, and we try to answer within a couple of hours. I also want to remind you about the accelerator, so let's do that. So Jaime, it's done. Cloud accelerator. If you don't know what it is, it's a week where we invite developers to work with us. Simply, you continue to work like if you were at home or in the office on your project, but you're sitting next to us. So if you have any questions, if you want to explore something new, if you have an idea, then you could just talk to us directly. The next one is it next week, 26, in San Francisco, then we have Munich in March, we have Dubai in April, we have a special in Montreal about the app framework. So if you attended Sean Gilmore present early this week, then you heard about that. So that's something very new. Then we have Boston, Barcelona, Sydney. So if you're interested to work on your project but get special attention or let's say support from us, that's the place to go. You need to proposal because we can't accept everyone. But yeah, submit one, review it, and hopefully you get invited. Again, on GitHub, this is where we post all our samples and we review them regularly. I know that the Forge RCDB sample has a lot of love, but it's not really a sample, it's a showcase. This is where we put our most interesting example showcase we wrote, but it's really for the other example we try to be as simple as we could, but for this one, yeah, very advanced, for advanced people. Yeah, to finish, if you have any questions, welcome to ask now. You or to contact us later. So Viru, do we have any general questions?
I have a question. I have a question. So in model derivative API and viewer, when it's going to support IFC space objects?
Oh, I know this one. Okay, so IFC spaces are actually partially supported today. By partially, I mean that the information is there. It's just that the graphical object for its representation is not there. We have a fix. It was supposed to be rolled out a couple of months ago already, and I think it was, but there was a rollback on the fix, so I need to check again with the developers here at Autodesk to know when it will be fully available again on. So if you can capture the name, I can send the information in more details.
Yeah, I have all the questions and the persons who have asked that. That's not a problem.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's it for now. Any questions? I don't see any questions at present.
Okay, so I'll stay 5 more minutes to see if there's more questions. But again, thank you everyone for joining us today for this presentation. And if you have any follow-up questions you want to go with me or Denise, please do so. And I hope to meet you in person one day. So thank you for joining us. And I'll stay 5-10 more minutes if you have any more questions. Thank you.